Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Boss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today as we're going to talk about something you probably didn't notice in the news. Very often, there are things that are reported that just pass on by. They're fleeting in the time that they're available for the public to even notice, and then brushed aside, even though what was being addressed, the news that is being presented, is often very important, and it often touches on a much larger subject in the nation that perhaps the news media and certain political individuals don't want to be addressed. They don't want this to be in the public mindset. So we're going to talk about one of those issues that we saw today. Now, before we get started, we do want to mention that if this is the first time you're seeing our channel, we welcome you and we thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on YouTube, Facebook, DLive, Twitter, essentially all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to reach out to you, to be able to hear your voice, your chats, your tweets, and your phone calls from anywhere in the world to tell us what you think about the issues that affect you. Now, we do that because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your right to be able to speak. And whether your government agrees, whether the internet overlords agree, we want to hear your voice. So we hope you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So very often we find that there are situations, sometimes stories in the news that'll come out and therefore it's been reported, but they're put into a back burner. They're on the back page. In terms of social media, it's a tweet that you'll see, but no one ever responds to. It's a video that'll be published, but it doesn't get any attention. It's not pushed by the media for you to pay attention to it. It's covered up by bigger news in that day or in that news cycle, and so you don't really get to find out about it unless it comes up again somewhere down the road. Today is kind of like that situation. And we've seen this often, where a politician is asked a question that is on the mind of the public. It's a national issue. And that politician kind of sort of gives an answer, but no one really wants to address it. The news media just shrugs it off. I mean, we've seen that happen many a time. You may recall Jerry Nadler, Representative Jerry Nadler, when he was asked a question about Antifa and the violence of Antifa. At a time where we saw Portland was in the middle of 120 days of consistent and straight rioting, when we saw that Minneapolis was burning down, when there were riots in Seattle, and there were riots in New York City, Austin, Texas, Boulder, Colorado, when we saw that a small group of progressive extremists took over a small portion of of the United States and created their own quasi-country, the Chaz, or otherwise known as the CHOP, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. When Jerry Nadler, when confronted with that, with the violence that was actually ongoing and being reported in news, in video, on all social media, and to a lesser extent, the major media, the answer from Jerry Nadler was, it just doesn't exist. It's a myth. It's not real. Now, most people probably don't remember that. It came and went. It was a story that no one was paying attention. And then we had the election, so no one really paid attention. And then we're into 2021 and the Biden-Harris administration and the many failures and problems that we've seen over the last year. But yet, that story existed, and it's important. It's a politician kind of answering a very important question that was on the public's mind at the time, and it was largely brushed aside. Well, we're seeing a similar kind of situation right now with Beto O'Rourke. And in Texas, the fake Hispanic, again, Robert O'Rourke, is Irish American. He's not Hispanic. He has no Hispanic blood in his family line. He's appropriated the nickname of Beto, which is advantageous in Texas to help him get more votes from Hispanic voters and to make him seem more like everyone else. But that's an appropriation by a white man, a rich white male who happens to be a Democrat, so he gets away with it. But according to the rules of the progressive left, it's still an appropriation. It's a macro aggression. But Robert Rourke is in Texas, and he was asked a question, and it caught our attention because we know the rest of the news media is going to ignore it, but we think it's important to cover. So we're going to talk about it. What you see before you is a town hall in Texas, and it happened on March 13th. And the gentleman who's asking the question is a veteran of the United States military. And he had a series of things to say about the state of the United States, the status that we find ourselves in. And then he ends it with a question to Beto O'Rourke, much to the displeasure of a very large gathering of what seems to be mostly Democrats. And then I want you to listen to the answer as well. So let's take a listen.
So we need to get down to some real darn looking at what is right and what is wrong. And then you support CRT in our schools.
Oh, here we go.
It's all right, it's all right, it's all right.
Critical race theory.
So a couple of things. First, I know that. No, can we work on that feedback? You got it? Okay. First, I know that everyone agrees that we are grateful to you for being here, for your service to our country, to your wife for her service to the community as a teacher. I actually think we probably agree, and you know, we can follow up later, but I think we agree on most of these issues. You said that nobody can buy a firearm in Texas without going through a background check. I want that to be the case. Right now, you can buy a firearm privately, and there's no background check. So 8 people lost their lives in Midland, Odessa by a guy who tried to buy a firearm the way that you just described. You're absolutely right. Was unable to do this because of the background check, and then could legally in Texas buy from a private seller. Bought that gun, went out, and killed a bunch of people.
So let's understand that in Texas, there's also been several cases of individuals who bought their firearms privately that defended synagogues and churches and the public from mass shooters and individuals who were criminal and deranged. But Beto O'Rourke doesn't want to address that. And more importantly, he wants to, and he's about to say, well, we need universal background checks. Except that's giving a list of every firearm in America to the government. Something that might cause a lot of people to be concerned with the government knowing every single person and every single firearm in America, giving them more power than they've ever had before. But we'll go on.
Midland, Odessa. So I think maybe we agree that there should be universal background checks. And I think that's a great start. I think we both agree that we should, if we need to, increase domestic production here in Texas, because you're right, I don't want to import oil from Venezuela. I don't want to import it from Iran for sure. I don't want to have to go to war or have anyone else's kids go to war to protect our supply line. So we agree there, and I want to make sure that we increase production in Texas. I want the jobs to be here as well. And I think you and I probably are both on the same page as well. We don't see CRT being taught in our schools right now. It's a course that is taught in law school. No, I don't think it should be taught in our schools. Yeah.
So let me stop right there. Did you hear what he just said? Oh, it's a course that's taught in law schools. See, he's deflecting. And now, of course, he did say, no, he doesn't think that critical race theory should be taught in our schools, presumably to our kids in public school, in elementary and junior high school, and maybe even high school. That's the assumption I'm taking from what he said. But he also said, well, it doesn't exist, though. It's not real. And see, that's just not true. See, that's a deflection. It's a way of that we see many of the politicians, many of the proponents of critical race theory, of intersectionality, of the far left progressive ideology they like to push these things off and say, well, it doesn't apply. It's not a reality. That it's just a fear and a question that you have in your mind, but it doesn't exist. Well, that's not really true, Beto O'Rourke, you fake Hispanic. So let's understand what we're talking about here. Because if we go to, say, the Britannica and look up the basic tenets of critical race theory is that race is a social construct. It's not biological. So even though I'm black and Hispanic, that's not real. What it is that I'm black because society says I'm black, or I'm Hispanic because society says I'm Hispanic. Therefore, Beto O'Rourke is a real Hispanic because he's assumed himself as being that, even though he's Irish by his heritage, but it's a social construct. So he can assume and become Hispanic even though he's Irish. Going on. Secondly, racism in the United States is normal, not aberrational. That is the normal state of America. That America is inherently racist. It is systemically racist. And it is historically and systemically racist for white people in their benefit. Therefore, white people are proponents. They push racism, and people of color, blacks, Hispanics, everyone else, well, they're victims. And that's what you're born into. That's the role you're born into in America. That if you're white, you are a racist, which would be evil. And if you're a person of color, well, then you're a victim. And these are conditions that last your entire life. Going on, they mentioned that third, all the efforts that have been made in the United States to end segregation, to end racism, well, they're not real. They're fake. They were just done as propaganda, as a photo op. That's from Professor Derek Bell of Harvard University, one of the originators of critical race theory in the United States. Fourth, they believe, members and proponents of critical race theory believe that all the media, all the entertainment, movies, everything that you see, well, that's meant to promote the idea that if you're black, you're a victim, and if you're white, well, you're racist and you have a privilege. Fifth, and this is another one that's always very interesting, is intersectionality. That no individual can be adequately identified by membership in a single group. You're not an individual. You are black, and then your whatever sex you may have, whatever religion you may have, whatever sexual preference you have. These are things that are the categories that you belong in. That critical race theory believes in. You are a category, just a series of checklists, but not an individual. Okay, so that's what critical race theory believes. Oh, I almost left out the sixth and the final thing is that the voice of color. That only people who are just like you, so people with the same color of skin, the same sex, the same sexual preference, they're the only people who can speak to you. They're the only ones who can speak for you. That anyone who has any other life experience, well, that doesn't matter because it's not your life experience because they're not the same series of categories and checkboxes. Is incompatible. It's impossible for you to understand the experiences I've gone through in life because, well, you have a different color of skin. These are the ideas that come from critical race theory. That's what proponents of critical race theory believe. There's a lot of problems with this, obviously. And Beto O'Rourke is addressing that this shouldn't be in our schools, but it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in our schools, so it's not a big deal. In fact, he's taking a position kind of like what the NAACP takes. Now, NAACP defines critical race theory. What is critical race theory? It's societal issues like Black Americans' higher mortality rate, outsized exposure to police violence, the school-to-prison pipeline, denial of affordable housing, and the rates of death of Black women in childbirth are not unrelated anomalies. In other words, they're connected. they are attributable. It's racism. That racism is the reason why there's more police violence, which, by the way, as we have shown on this program many times, factually is incorrect. It is an absolute lie. The data across the entire United States shows that's not true. The school to prison pipeline, which is a popular talking point amongst the far left, also doesn't exist. All data, all evidence, every study that has been done shows that the more education you have, the better off your life is and the less likely you are to go to prison. That is a fact. So how schools and becoming more educated, which has been identified as one of the key factors to having a prosperous and successful life, how that leads just those people of color to prison doesn't make sense. It doesn't exist. It's a wonderful talking point, doesn't exist. How denial of affordable housing is more an issue of poverty, not race. When you're giving birth to a child, I don't think racism, an idea, has anything to do with the physicality that's going on there. I could be wrong, but I don't believe so. We understand what is critical race theory, and that critical race theory can be applied besides just the actual course, because it is correct. Critical race theory initially started off in law schools, something that Beto O'Rourke has said. But it's not just isolated to that. We see that in our everyday life. We've seen that in our entertainment. We see that in movies. We see the applications of critical race theory, the application of these ideas being put in place in our everyday lives and for our children as well. One of the ways that we've seen it being applied, as noted by the Chicago Tribune, math is racist. According to, and this is from October 10th of 2019, is Seattle really teaching that math is racist? That is a principle of critical race theory application, because critical race theory does believe that math is racist because all institutions, that means education and the military and the legal system and all forms of government, it's all racist. So therefore, math and the way math is taught is racist. And in Seattle, math lessons are more than just theoretical. It's more than just 2 + 2 = 4. Seattle recently released proposals which include questions like, quote, where does power and oppression show up in our math experiences? Because you got to understand, there's oppression in 2 + 2 = 4. You have to understand that there's a power dynamic in 3 × 3 = 9. And they go on. Also the question, quote, how is math manipulated to allow inequality and oppression to persist? Because there is oppression in knowing that the square root of 4 is 2. That's oppressive. And there's inequality in knowing how to do algebra or how to do calculus. That's obviously inequality in its action. Now, several online critics voiced their disapproval, insisting that Seattle schools were trying to politicize a subject that often serves as a universal language with clear, objective answers. Yes, because 2 + 2 = 4. That is objective. It is factual. It is clear. There is no real question there. But again, that's why they have to add in, where's the oppression in math? Because now it's political. Oppression and power being dynamics of politics, not math. And then we see another aspect of this. Back in February of 2020, we spoke with Dr. Art Laffer about math, about the protests against him at Binghamton University because he was going to speak. Because Binghamton University does not like conservatives or Republicans. They had protests over students being Republican and conservative, and they attacked Dr. Art Laffer, an economist, coming to speak to the university to speak about economics. And he had this to say.
And it's math, it's not sociology, it's not anthropology, it's not wiffy-waffy-woofy, it's math.
Mm-hmm.
Hard
And
numbers.
that's what it is. And these guys who are screaming the opposite line, they don't know straight up from second.
And kind of going off of that, I mean, today we had you on to kind of talk about what you couldn't talk about, right? And what you're giving us right now is not controversial. Like you said, it's numbers. I mean, this is hard facts you're giving us. You're not giving us, you know, your feelings or anything. You're giving us hard numbers. And why?
Oh, if I'd have been there, I'd have given you a big hug and I'd have showed you my feelings. No, it's math. It's just plain math. And, you know, I could sit down with anyone and go through the math. Get them in there.
Again, Beto O'Rourke made it very clear. Well, critical race theory doesn't exist in our schools. And he was talking about elementary schools and high schools and junior high schools. He wasn't talking about college. And to be fair, Dr. Art Laffer was appearing at Binghamton University, a college. So what about when we're at our regular schools? What about when in Broome County, when teachers are presenting materials to students? These are 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old students that was observed by parents on video, a video that was subsequently removed from the internet because of the outrage and the anger of parents, because the teacher was apologizing for being white and was teaching students that if you're white, well, you're racist, and if you're black, you're a victim, and don't trust the police. And this is part of the outrage that came up at that time. And I have to say that I was deeply troubled when I saw the video and heard of this book. There's something that's being said here over and over again, and I think it's very important to understand it. We're introducing politics to the very youngest and most vulnerable of our children in our community. I think that's wrong. That's not the place of education. That's not the place of the school system. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not blaming the teachers per se. I am not blaming the school system per se. This is a bigger problem. Perhaps the community hasn't been paying attention enough to allow this to seep in. But unlike many people who will be speaking, and they have very personal, serious reasons why they believe in social justice and then why they believe in equity. But let's understand, that's not what the school is there for. The school is there to teach the children, not about equity, a political ideology, not about social justice, a political ideology. And if you do wish to do that, keep that to the high schools, where we have the young adults about to enter into society and going on to higher learning. So that just gives you a short understanding of it. And there were many, many people in the hour and 11 minutes of the video that we covered of the public speaking to the Binghamton School Board to tell them about their displeasure about teaching children to hate, to be separate, to be nothing more than a check mark in a box of categories. But this is what Beto O'Rourke says doesn't exist, even though now I'm showing you this is 2021. This happened in an elementary school with children, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old children. So you might say, well, Mike, that's just not enough. How is there any other evidence you might have? And how about this? Looking at August of 2021, Black mother condemns her daughter's Black Atlanta elementary school because the principal was segregating classes, separating children by their race, because Black students can only learn with other Black students around them. White students can only learn with other white students around them. And to mix them, to have them integrated, to reverse Brown versus Board of Education, well, that's in the best interest of the students. That's critical race theory. That is an application of critical race theory. The very idea that Professor Bell actually brought up first. When he created critical race theory, he created the idea that Brown versus the Board of Education was wrong, that segregation is a good thing. But it wasn't isolated to just there, because in November of 2021, in Manhattan, we saw another school was also sorting children based on their race, a social construct, but separating these students to talk about critical race theory. The Lower Manhattan school community conducted controversial exercises to undo the legacy of racism and oppression in the country that impacts our school community by separating students, whites, Asians, blacks, Hispanics, because Beto O'Rourke says that doesn't happen in our elementary schools, in our high schools. That only happens in college law schools. And yet, over and over again, we're finding evidence that that's not correct. Here's St. Paul, and this is in Minnesota. St. Paul public schools are one of the most diverse districts in the state, and they are preferring and they are encouraging segregation. Segregation is happening, where we're seeing the schools closing because there aren't enough students going to the public schools. Rather, they're going to charter schools that are almost exclusively segregated. Again, this is an application of critical race theory. Notice, it's not critical race theory itself, it's the application of critical race theory. It's the application of critical race theory that tells us that math is racist, and therefore we have to introduce politics into math, that we have to introduce politics into our classrooms and into what children 5, 6, 7, 8 years old are being taught, that we have to segregate our schools and separate children because, well, you can only learn from others like yourself. People have to be represented, and you can only learn from the people who represent you. This is the ideology that Beto O'Rourke is defending here when he says, well, critical race theory doesn't actually apply. It's not really there. And we know that it's at the colleges because this is SUNY Broome. And we covered that in December of 2021, where we showed you programs that are going on at SUNY Broome, the State University of New York in Broome County, where they are advocating and teaching students about critical race theory and its applications, and they are applying it in their classrooms, in programs, and this program is going to continue in May of 2022, and it's going to try and reach even more students and the public to teach them how to properly think, how to recognize that you are inherently, if you're white, you're inherently a racist, and if you're black or Hispanic, you're inherently a victim. But to say that it's at our community colleges is not enough, because it's also, again, going back to Binghamton University, this isn't a new thing. In 2016, there was the hashtag Stop White People 2K16, a program based on critical race theory applications to teach the incoming freshman class how to properly think, and that if they weren't thinking properly, that they could be educated to understand their failure for not being aligned with the progressive ideology. We know that this same school, 2019, Binghamton University, had a leftist mob attack conservative students. We know that there's been outrage that even right now, at Binghamton University, February 2022, that Binghamton sociology professors are going and segregating their classes to the point that students are being picked on only because of the color of their skin. If you happen to be white and if you happen to be male, well, you are less than, and you don't get to ask questions in a class you paid for at a state university. No. You don't get to do that. See, this is again the application of critical race theory. And we see this over and over again. You know where else we see the application of critical race theory in our everyday lives? When Joe Biden tells you that if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for him or not, then you ain't black. This is the progressive left telling you on a African-American program that you don't have a choice. You are a checkbox. You are a category. You're not an individual. And you have to go with what that category has been told to do. Another way of looking at that is perhaps looking at the LA Times, in 2021, August of 2021, when the LA Times called Larry Elder the black face of white supremacy, one of several articles attacking Larry Elder because he is a black conservative and not a progressive. That was their biggest argument against Larry Elder, who at the time was running for the governor of California, because Larry Elder wasn't progressive. And that, again, is a critical race theory application, because you can only speak with the voice of that has been approved, the voice that has been given to your category, whether that be male or female, gay or straight, black, white, or Hispanic or Asian. It's already been defined for you. And to do anything else is to be racist. That's what Beto O'Rourke is trying to tell you in his little conversation.
Yeah, I want to make sure, look, folks, and gentleman is asking a question that's on the minds of a lot of people here, so I'm glad he asked it. I want to make sure that when folks try to distract us or divide us on issues, like they're not teaching CRT in grade school right now, they may be teaching it in law school where it is appropriate.
See how he deflected and deflates it? He says, no, we're not teaching that. It's in law schools. It's not in anything else. It's only a law school class, except as we have just shown you, it's in our elementary schools, it's in our middle schools, and it's in our regular colleges, not law college, not the universities for anyone who wants to become a lawyer, but just any, whether it's a community college or a state college, it's there. And this is happening in New York State. And Beto saying it doesn't exist in Texas. It doesn't exist in America. And yet evidence is showing that for years, 2019, 2020, 2021, and we can go back further if we need to, it does exist. And it is happening. No, it's not the class that Professor Derek Bell is teaching at Harvard. No, but it's the applications of that theory that he has created that is being taught to children as young as 5 and children in our high schools and to children in our middle schools. It's why we're seeing segregation in those schools. It's why math is being labeled as racist and politics are being interjected into that. It's why we're seeing students at campuses committing riots against other members of their schools for the simple fact that they don't have the same political ideology or they have the different color of skin. Beto O'Rourke is one of the worst kinds of politicians I've ever seen. He's like Jerry Nadler in that he's denying something that is absolutely visible to everyone in the nation, which is why everyone in the nation is talking about it. It's why people oppose this. This is why he said he opposes it. He says it doesn't exist outside of college. And yet we all know it does. We have all seen that it does. And his answer is, and if you believe the evidence that is in front of your eyes, the evidence that we have all been living through for years, if you believe that, well, then it's your fault. You're the problem. I didn't think Beto O'Rourke was ever going to win in Texas, and I stand by that. I do not believe he will win. He's a fake Hispanic who has appropriated the Hispanic culture to try and engender and gain a few more votes. He's a dyed-in-the-wool liberal who wants to destroy the Second Amendment and take away your rights. He has publicly said he wants to take away your right to own a AK-47, AR-15, a semi-automatic rifle that most Americans already own. I'm going to enjoy what I believe and I predict will be the result of the Texas race. That Beto O'Rourke will lose again, just as he lost in Congress, just as he lost in his Senate attempt, just as he lost his attempt to get the presidential nomination, and now he will lose as governor. And I look forward to seeing him lose that. Because someone who wants to deny the facts that exist in front of us, someone who would say, you are a problem for recognizing the problems that exist, the issues that we all see every day for years, anyone like that, I don't believe deserves to be in elected office. Now, you may think I'm wrong. You may say, Mike, that's not true. You may say that critical race theory, its applications do not exist in schools, and you will disregard all of the evidence I've just shown and much more that we have covered on this program. And that is your right. If it doesn't exist, what's the problem with having a law that says don't allow it? I would also ask, do you believe that a politician who wants to segregate the public into those who believe the approved messaging and those that do not, do you think that's someone who should be elected to any elected office? We look forward to hearing your answer, and we thank you, and we hope to see you this Sunday at 2:30 p.m.